really appreciate it, Ryan. Taking the time, not making you any money directly, but taking the time to educate me has been awesome, and that's a really, really cool thing to do. I appreciate that.
Hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep, I can. Yep, gotcha.
How's it going, Logan?
Hey, it's going well, Ryan. I appreciate you taking the time to basically just educate me. I guess nothing else.
100%, man. 100%. Happy to do it. So, tell me a little bit about what's going on.
Okay, yeah. So I have orders to go to Georgia, and so I would actually check in March. But long story short, we're leaving in February. We're going to be renting down there because it's for such a short period of time. It just didn't make sense to do anything else.
Sure.
And I will then be moving somewhere else after basically like 6-7 months to somewhere else. I don't know exactly where that's going to be just yet. Like I said, our concerns so we're selling our house because we looked at the numbers, and with the HOA, the property taxes, and then accounting for vacancy, the numbers just didn't work for us. I'd love to turn it into like a short-term rental, but you can't do that with the HOA. So the numbers just didn't work for us. So talking to some realtors, haven't signed anything or anything like that, but just to put it on the market here soon. And then one of the realtors had mentioned, hey, why don't you consider the Pace Morby group, which is funny because I was already a part of that Facebook group, so I hadn't even considered it. So then the rest is history. So I posted, and then you reached out to me. So like I said, I know a little bit about creative financing. I read read Pace Morby's book. I've read some things on Bigger Pockets and whatnot, but otherwise, I've never done it. Never known someone who personally has done creative deals. So, yeah.
Good stuff, man.
To answer your question.
Well, just so you know a little bit about me, since I am a stranger, if it helps a little bit, I've done about 25 sub-2 deals in the last 6 months, so we do a good bit of them. Doesn't mean I know everything, but we've done enough to hopefully be able to answer your questions. And so I think the best thing to do to be helpful to you guys would be if you just lob stuff at me, and I'll try and be as helpful as I can to kind of educate and answer where I can.
Okay, yeah, that sounds perfect, because at this point I probably just don't know what I don't know.
Sure.
So big concern that we have is the VA entitlement, which I think you'd actually mentioned to me about if it's going to affect VA entitlement, it's going to get a hold of that amount for entitlement. So I think that was you that was saying that.
Yeah, I did that over text.
So that's our big concern.
Okay,
That's right.
Let's go a little more in depth on that, because I was just kind of trying to give you a guideline over text or whatever it was. But yeah, so typically speaking, and it's true where you live, VA entitlement, it may go up a little in 2024. I'm not 100% sure, but it's certainly not going to go up a crazy amount. It was $726,000 and $726,200 is your entitlement. So that's exactly what it sounds like, and what we talked about yesterday. Whatever your loan origination was previously, that's going to be subtracted from that entitlement. I think you said it was around $400,000-ish purchase price, 405, something like that.
Correct.
And so that would come off your entitlement, right? Whatever was originated on the loan. So let's say 400 for easy numbers. That means you have approximately $326,000 left on your entitlement. So aside from DTI, let's just talk about entitlement. If you were to go buy another house for $326,000 or less, you could buy it the same way you bought this one, 0 down, good to go. If you were to go buy a house for, let's say, $400,000, you would have $326,000 of entitlement, and then the way it works with VA is that the difference, we'll say $75,000 for easy numbers, that difference of $75,000, you have to pay 25% down on the difference. So in this case, it would still be pretty minimal, right? 25% of 75,000 is like $15K, something like that. So you would have to pay that down payment on a $400,000 house, and obviously, if it's a $500,000 house, so on and so forth. So that's how the entitlement works. Now, that's obviously separate from DTI, right? And so DTI, there's two avenues we can look at here for your specific scenario. So the first one is that you don't buy a house for another year. If you don't buy a house for another year and somebody were to buy your house creatively and get it serviced, you can take those receipts from the servicing, show your next underwriter, or work with one of our lenders if you want that has experience with it. But after a year, they can look at those receipts and say, yes, Logan's no longer responsible for paying this. We can cancel it off of his debt to income. He can go buy another property. That's the first way. The second one is that you already qualify for another house, which I don't know if you've checked or if you know this or not, but depending on if both sides are working, oftentimes you may be able to just qualify for another house as is, and then you don't care about the debt to income coming off. And that would be if you were trying to buy, 7 months from now, 6 months from now. And sometimes, I don't want to make any promises, but sometimes that 1 year timeline can be pushed up to like 6 months depending on the lender. But I wouldn't rely on that. I would, assume worst case and hope for the best, right? So that's how that works. And then alternatively, depending on people's situation, we also work with people where we take over a VA loan and they'll go get a regular loan or an FHA loan. And obviously, you can do that as well. Then you don't have to worry about the entitlement. But obviously, having VA loans is a benefit to what you do, and wanting to take advantage of that makes complete sense. Does that all make sense?
No, it does. Yeah. So could you? I'm sorry, I'm trying to take notes as well because
Yeah.
my wife's not here with me. So receipts from. Can you say that first part again? That you take the receipts for a year.
Sure. So debt to income is just a lender looking and saying how much you can afford, right? And so right now your name's on the mortgage. They say Logan is responsible for whatever it was. I think it's about $2,000 a month of payments, right? Now, if Ryan comes in and makes those payments for you, for the first month you could say, well, look, I'm not responsible for these payments. Ryan's responsible, but you haven't really proven that yet, if that makes sense. Like that's not trustworthy. Maybe I just paid it for 1 month. That's kind of maybe a weird example, but the point is, if you do it for a year, then that's enough in most lenders' eyes to say, okay, they are fully not responsible for this anymore. It's clearly being paid by somebody else. They don't have an obligation to making these monthly payments, so we're no longer going to consider that debt, or we're going to cancel said debt out. And that way, you're free to go do whatever.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for recapping that for me.
Yep.
Okay, now that makes perfect sense. And then, so with that, that kind of leads into my other concern, which is what's it called, due on sell.
Sure.
Yeah, due on sale clause. So the way that I understand this is, I understand that it's very rare if it does happen, but it's still like the possibility, the risk is there of, hey, well, hang on, didn't you just sell the house? Now you owe us the entire amount of the loan.
Sure. So
right.
We kind of look at the. Go ahead.
Explain that?
Yeah. So we kind of look at it like the Boogie
sorry,
Monster. Like you said, it's not something that happens very often. But I also, whenever I'm on a phone call like this, I want to talk about worst case scenarios, because we could talk about best case scenarios all day long, and that's not very helpful. So worst case scenario, due on sale gets called. My short answer is it's basically a paperwork thing. So if it gets called, there's different things you can do in different states that satisfy the lender's requirements. They take a little bit more paperwork and money for us, and they don't have any real benefit for you, which is why we don't just do it in the first place. In Virginia, I can't remember what it's called, but it'll either be called something like an executory contract or a land contract or a contract for deed. And all that means is, kind of to back up, if you were to sell typical sub-2, what happens is mortgage stays in your name, deed transfers, that way the new owner is responsible for everything, they own the house, blah, blah, blah. If you do this other version, the contract for deed, we'll call it, then what happens is you actually basically say, hey, these guys own the house, but I actually still have the deed in my name as well. And when you do that, that satisfies lender requirements. So typically speaking, when you get a due on sale clause called, you're saying kind of the fear would be, hey, you have to pay all this money back immediately, right? How it actually works is when they send you that notice, it's usually a 30-day notice to comply, essentially, or pay. And within those 30 days, you would do the paperwork to satisfy the lender and call them back and handle it. And we have a full-time team. They're called transaction coordinators. That's what they do. They handle this stuff. if and when it does come up. So we've never had to pay off a house from a due on sale clause, if that's helpful. It's just, okay, they're deciding to throw a wrench. Let's do some paperwork and get around it.
Okay. No, that makes a ton of sense. Okay. Well, I mean that helps me out a ton, actually. Yes, that makes sense. Because everywhere I'm looking, and I know bigger pockets. It seems like bigger pockets kind of have a bias against sub two, sort of. I mean, it seems like there's not a lot on bigger pockets on sub two, and the stuff that I find, it seems to be pretty against sub two stuff. So anyway, it's interesting to get a different perspective. Maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places. I don't know.
No, I mean you're always going to find that stuff, right? And it's especially at you as somebody looking to sell their house, like you should do your research, of course. What I would tell you, and like I said, I'm not saying that it means you should or should not trust me, but I'm willing to bet most of the people you're reading from haven't actually done any transactions, or at least not as many transactions as we have. So I'm not speaking from a YouTube video. I'm speaking from what we actually do, right? It's facts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was my three main. That was my three main concerns. I guess not to put the ball in your court, but is there questions that I should be asking that I'm not thinking about at this point?
Yeah, so the other big one that comes up is what if somebody defaults on the loan, right? That's one that gets asked to us all the time. What if they default on the loan? Yeah, so typically speaking, and again, it kind of depends on the state and how our coordinators want to handle it, but some sort of paperwork will be put in place that gives you the property back. That's the short answer. That, again, is a worst case scenario, right? People that sell their properties don't want to be given it back, sure. But in a situation where somebody defaulted on the loan, you'd rather get the property back than nothing, I would assume. We could, of course, not put that in the paperwork if you didn't want. But basically, like, worst case scenario, how I look at it is, let's say I was to buy your house tomorrow. I'd come in, I'd give you guys a down payment. I'd come furnish the house, clean it up if it needs it. I know it's a new build, so it probably doesn't. And then I'd hold on to it. And when we're investors, right? We raise money to come into these deals. So in theory, if we came in and raised money to close on this house, it would make absolutely no sense to default for, let's say, the first year or two, right? I mean, we've already raised the money. The house is going to get paid for. It's an investment, right? We're putting our time and energy into it. So let's skip past maybe a year, 2 years. Let's say 2 years from now, I were to default on the house. Well, in that scenario, which again is worst case, you would get to keep the down payment that I gave you. You would get to keep all the furniture in the property. You would get the appreciation from the property, and so you'd get a property back, and you could go sell it and make $100,000 probably off of all that stuff I just mentioned, or change your mind and rent it out, or whatever you want to do. But the worst case scenario is actually a pretty good scenario, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, it does.
So that's kind of what that looks like.
In theory, I wouldn't want it back, but yeah,
exactly.
I wouldn't want it back, but yes, if I do get it back, at least there's some positives to it.
Yeah, exactly. So again, worst case scenario talk here, but those are the three main things that come up. The other thing that I would throw back at you, you're asking about what questions you should ask. There's really three ways that we look at anybody that's interested in selling their house creatively, or really selling their house at all. And it sounds like you've already dabbled at the other two, but I think basic numbers that you had given me, just to keep it simple, was that we're estimating the house is maybe worth around $440, something like that, and you guys owe about $390.
Correct.
So the three main options is run it out, right, which you guys have looked at, and even if it was break even or made a little bit of money, being a landlord's not for everybody. That's for dang sure. So that's option number one. Option number two is to give it to a realtor, right, and try and sell it traditionally. And I'm happy to walk you guys through kind of what we see on that. I don't know how many houses you've bought and sold before. Again, obviously we do a decent amount of it. But typically speaking, you're going to be looking at between 7 and 8% fees to sell your house on the market. That's 6% for the agents, and then 1 to 2% for closing costs. That's kind of the industry average, right? So what I was telling you, 7 to 8%. Yep, that's what we see. And so when you look at that, I can do some quick math for you. I think I did it last night, and it was about, let's see, 440 Yeah, so you're looking at making about a little under 15,000 or so if you were to sell that way. Now here's where people get caught up with that though. So 15,000 in profit is what you're looking at if you sell with an agent. But there's a lot more to consider. So first of all, average time on the market, let's say 3 months ish for you. You guys are moving out, right? So let's say that you have to add those 3 months. So that's about $6,000, right? So that puts you at 9,000 in profit. And obviously this is scenario, but that puts you at 9,000 profit. And then the question you have to ask is, are you going to get a full price offer? Probably not. I'm not going to say you're not. I'm not a market expert here. But probably not, right? You're probably going to have a little bit of flexibility on your price. And there goes your margin, right? So 440, if you're going to make 9,000, means that if you get an offer at 430, you can't take that offer or else you're going to lose $1,000
right
at those rates. So that's something to consider too. But some people, and we just met, so I don't know your scenario. Some people say, hey, it's fine if I lose $5,000 or $10,000. I'd rather just get rid of the house and go that route. But what I can tell you is that if you were to sell creatively, I haven't run all the numbers, but I looked at it this morning. It's going to be tight, right, with the HOA. You already know that. But there are people that are willing to buy investment properties for things like tax benefits and appreciation and things like that. And so if we were able to pull that off, you would probably net around the same, maybe $10,000, $15,000, something like that. But you would actually net that because when you do a creative offer, at least if you're working with somebody that knows what they're doing, it's going to be a net offer. So I'm not going to come to you and say, Logan, I'll give you $15,000, but I need you to cover, closing costs and this and that. And then I'm going to tell you that I don't like the way the carpet looks and I want you to pay for that. It's going to be, hey, Logan, we'll give you $10,000 at closing, right? It's just a flat, we'll pay this and we'll cover all the fees and everything else associated.
Okay. Yeah, so for option, you're talking, so first option being rent, second option being realtor. So for second option, right now we've got 2 realtors in mind. One of them is willing to do 4%, 1% to her and 3% to the buyer's agent. So I know that affects the numbers a little bit, but I still see your point about, and I've had this conversation with my wife, like the fact that the realtors are going down in rate is great, because that does buy us, a month or 2 to be on the market, but it kind of sucks to think like that too. So
yeah, and that's really a personal decision. Like that just depends on what fits best with what you guys are shooting for. That's great. Less realtor commission, right? That saves you the 2%, like you said. So that might give you a little bit more breathing room. And what you could do is you could try and go the realtor route and then go from there. But what I will tell you, because we deal with a lot of on-market properties, is that if you sign a realtor contract, and it sounds like you may be friends with this person, or they might be a good realtor, which is great. But if you sign a realtor's contract, usually 6 months or something like that. If you were then to come back to me and say, hey Ryan, we were getting offers that were below our ask or whatever, are you guys still interested in coming in to buy it creative? The answer would be yes, but we would have to pay your realtor because you guys are under contract with them. And if we have to pay your realtor, like the short answer for us is that whether we're paying you and 10 other people or just you, we can still afford the same amount to pay because we're just raising money from investors, and that's all based off metrics and cash on cash and a bunch of nerdy number stuff. And so whether we're paying you or you and 2 realtors or you and 10 family members, it's the same amount of money. It's just more of it's going to get allotted to other people. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you're figuring that stuff out.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So I would, well, first of all, I'm happy to answer any other questions you have or get on another call or whatever. I think maybe now that I've tried to break that down a little bit for you, if that answers the questions, maybe you can take the time to think on them and figure out which one you think fits best with what you guys are trying to do. If you want to get on another call, I'm happy to make the time to do that. And usually when I get off a call with people, they'll have a couple more questions that they come up with right after we hang up, right? Which is totally cool. You can text me or call me again. This is pretty much what I do is just trying to explain this stuff to people and find the best solution for them. So I'm happy to get back on the phone. If you decide you want to go the creative route, just let me know. And whether you're selling to us or you find somebody else that you'd rather sell to, I'm happy to try and point you in the right direction.
Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate it, Ryan. Taking the time, not making you any money directly, but taking the time to educate me has been awesome, and that's a really cool thing to do. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. Like I said, whether you work with us or someone else, I want to make sure that you're well educated by somebody that's been there and done it, so that you can make an informed decision. That's the goal.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man.
I'll let you get back to doing your other stuff.
All right, sounds good. Have a good rest of your day, man.
You too.
Okay. So that was just an inbound lead. That was somebody that saw us posting about buying creative deals, and there's so many people that are in these scenarios now where they need help with that stuff. And so he was somebody who had hit me up and just said, "Hey, I'm moving. I've got a low interest rate on my house, but I'm not going to make any money if I sell it on the market." At least from what he had been told. And really cool, you even heard on there the agent said, "Well, why don't you go talk to that Pace Mortgage group or whatever." So that's fun. That's really cool to hear. But he was just basically asking all the classic questions, right? You heard us go through it. He sent me a couple texts, and I was like, "Let's get on a phone call, dude, and answer these questions," because I answer questions like that for people all the time. It's a lot easier to just rip it out in a quick 10-20 minute phone call, and rather than try and text back and forth for a week. And you heard what I was saying at the end. Like, I truly mean that. That's what we do. Our goal is just to educate people. Every single time you do a creative transaction, it is a ongoing relationship with the seller. So you want to make sure that you form a good relationship with them and educate them as much as possible. Because if they do decide to sell creatively, you want it to be their decision, and you want it to be a decision that is actually going to benefit them, and not just be a decision that's great for us. We're going to make money. Like, no, not the goal. We're trying to win for everybody. And so that was just a live phone call with the seller, trying to educate as much as possible. And we'll see what happens. Maybe he decides to sell it on the market. Totally cool. And we circle back with them if they're not able to sell, and see if we can still be helpful. But as long as we did, our little part to educate and inform and be as helpful as possible, then we're happy. So that was a live call with the seller. Hopefully that was helpful. And until next time, let's keep making some phone calls.